an interest with UFOs is maladaptive to most people. How so?
Oh, yeah. You're quoting me on, I think, Danny Jones. I think in some ways, and this actually speaks to, we're on modern wisdom here. I think a lot of what people should be focused on is the lower end of Maslow's hierarchy. Like it's like subsistence living, paying taxes on time, putting food on the table, being basically healthy. And then I think at a certain point, then you start to care about this sort of more like existential, who are we? What's our place in the universe? What is humanity's place in the cosmos? And so that's why I think in some ways it's maladaptive, because if you don't have that lower end sort of figured out, it's like, why focus on this sort of, really crazy pie in the sky stuff?
That's so interesting that you think people have sort of taken the stair lift to the top of Everest. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like if you're asking, are we alone in the universe, but you haven't got a steady job, or your health's in the toilet, or you don't have a community of people around you, you're probably focusing on the wrong things.
100%. In fact, I think a lot of people focus on it as a circumvention of reality itself. It's an escape mechanism. And so you want to get abducted or taken away on a UFO or something.
Better
because
than this fucking place.
Yeah, right. You want to throw a Hail Mary because there's, things aren't going well on sort of a base level. And so I think for those people, they should probably just focus on the core issue. If they have like a marital problem or something, like go focus on that. Like,
yeah. That's an interesting question. What is the avatar in 2025 of somebody who's interested in UFOs? Because, there's kind of and I wonder why this is the case. When I think about UFOs, I always think about sort of the 60s and the 70s.
Yes.
That's kind of the golden era of abductions and stories and Roswell, and like that's kind of where my mind goes to.
Yes.
But you're a good example of someone who's super smart and is knee deep in all the research for this stuff. Something tells me you're probably a little bit non-typical for that.
Yeah.
But like, who is the avatar for the UFO investigator now, or the Monday morning quarterback?
I think it's radically shifting. So I think even 5-10 years ago, it would have been like you go to this like Contact in the Desert. Is this like, convention for UFOs? It used to actually take place in the actual desert. People started to get like heat strokes and stuff, and now it's like indoors. But it's all like, it's a lot of crystal healers from the Southwest sort of vibe. It's people who are, and I love a lot of these people, they'll live in like Sedona or something, or, in some of these small towns across the US, and they've had family experiences, or they're just a little more kind of woo-woo, and that's what kind of got them into this stuff. I think that's dramatically started to change. I mean, a good example is like certain people you've had on Eric Weinstein, my old colleague. We worked together at Thiel Capital at, Peter Thiel's family office, a very sort of conventionally successful guy. You had Tulsi Gabbard on. She's the now, director of national intelligence who oversees all of the intelligence agencies. And she has stated as part of her mandate that she wants to look into UFOs. Like this is, and I've actually spoken to her, and she is explicitly very interested in this topic. And so I think that plus a bunch of whistleblowers, David Grush at the National Geospatial Agency and NRO, and has kind of a very kind of typical and impressive.
Less of a sort of crusty granola crowd.
Yes, exactly. I think that has destigmatized it for a lot of people, and you're starting to see high agency, Silicon Valley, just, average people start to get into the topic.
Whatever happened with UAPs? Is UAPs and UFOs? Because there was a brief period where we went there. It was like people of color, colored people, and then we went back to people of color.
Yes. There's a whole like, there's like a whole like almost like woke UFO thing going on.
The nomenclature.
There's a nomenclature thing. Yeah. It was, and I don't like UAPs. The reason I don't like it, to get a little context, there was something called the UAP Task Force that was actually set up. And that was the context in which David Grush ended up blowing the whistle, because he was tasked by the National Geospatial Agency and this little group called the UAP Task Force, which had representatives from pretty much every branch of the military looking into UFOs explicitly, or UAPs as they called them. And that sort of in that sort of group, they decided that UAPs was the new term. It's a broader term, unidentified aerial phenomena, instead of unidentified flying object. I like UFO because it's more specific, actually. It's sort of more falsifiable in a sense. And a lot of people are, worried about this whole thing sort of being a psyop. And because of that, I like the classic just UFO, this was in the zeitgeist, like you said, in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And let's just go back to that.
In case UAP is some scurrilous attempt to try and weave something else in. So, it's a hot air balloon. It's a distortion in the upper atmosphere. It's a whatever.
100%. Some sort of secret weaponry. Like there's a whole, so many different, there's a slew of possibilities as far as what you might see in the sky these days, a mylar balloon, all these different things. And so I like UFO because it's more specific, and it's talking about the kind of archetypal, a saucer, a tic tac, a craft, these sort of, things that people have seen not only, since the 40s, 50s, and 60s, but across, millennia, like across disparate cultures too.
Yeah, imagine that someone's never really looked that deeply into UFOs. How would you lay out the landscape and story arc of evidence for them?
Yeah, I love this. So I think UFOs go way beyond the threshold of what you'd need evidence-wise to accept this as a worthy field of inquiry. If it were any other field, like literally the only reason people don't look into this is because people who are part of the priestly citadel of science, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, say there's nothing to UFOs. Otherwise, you have presidents who've openly talked about UFOs. You have Don Jr. just interviewed, outgoing President Trump in his first term saying, "What do you know about Roswell? I need to know." And Donald Trump goes, "I know a lot of interesting things and I won't say them here." You have President Obama saying we have unidentified flying objects that we don't know, what they are in our sky. We're investigating these things. The Office of Naval Intelligence and the Pentagon have released 2 reports, one in 2020, one in 2021. And there are all these objects that, you have this sort of decision tree of like space trash and, other sort, mylar balloons, like all these things. And you have a bunch of these things that were spotted that don't, neatly categorize. President Jimmy Carter saw a UFO and is on video saying, "I saw a UFO." He goes into his single term saying, "I want to declassify stuff around UFOs." And then you never really hear anything about it again, which is the same thing, by the way, that's happening with Trump. It's not even like the Epstein thing where you get this bizarre kind of denial, lone sex trafficker theory that everybody knows is bogus. With the UFO thing, it's this common trope where sometimes presidents will campaign on this thing and then they just go silent and they cite national security often. And so it's this very sort of weird thing. And then most recently in 2017, you had Leslie Kean, this New York Times journalist, come out with this article. Associated with the article are 3 videos. The gimbal, the Go Fast video, these are videos that were taken off the coast of Florida, and the Nimitz Tic Tac sighting, which is this very famous sighting. Commander David Fravor is this Navy pilot who's very well respected. He was actually in charge of guarding Los Angeles during 9/11 when we weren't sure how many planes were in the sky and which cities might be attacked. So he's like a very reputable guy. He speaks in this very matter-of-fact way. And he saw this tic-tac shaped object hovering right above the surface of the water. He was part of this Nimitz carrier strike group. So all these, Air Force carriers and his big Navy ships, and he went out on an F-16, saw this little tic tac, and the tic tac went up to 60,000 feet plus in 7/8 of a second. And you have him, you have FLIR, which is forward looking infrared, seeing this object, and this video is up. You can watch it on YouTube and stuff. So since then, and then David Grush, who's this whistleblower, saying that he's basically over 100 pages he gave to the IC Inspector General, this guy Thomas Monheim, in 2022. Thomas Monheim said this was urgent and credible, and he gave Thomas Monheim 40 whistleblowers directly who said that they had firsthand knowledge of UFO programs inside the government. And so that's like this very near-term falsifiable thing, right? It's not this like hand-wavy claim. And I think since then, people have really started to take this more seriously. But even more sort of, outside of high levels of government and, needing to sort of explain that sort of mass hysteria away if you're kind of a debunker. You have databases like the National UFO Reporting Center, which have over 100,000 instances online. It's like I think it's 150K plus at this point. You have a great book called UFOs and Nukes. So one thing people like to say as far as why UFOs aren't scientific or aren't real is because they're ephemeral. They show up randomly, right? There's no repeatable. Science has to be repeatable, right? And I think this is very repeatable, actually, because UFOs show up consistently around nuclear installations, nuclear weapons installations, and nuclear energy civilian grids. And so this book, which is almost 600 pages, it's the most dry, terse book you'll ever read in your life. It's almost boring because it's so meticulously done. And if you speak to the guy who wrote it, this guy named Robert Hastings, you get no grifting vibes, no like salesy, bullshit at all.
It's a spreadsheet masquerading as a book.
That's right. It's a database, and it's even better than a database because it's filtering for witnesses who are inherently the most credible witnesses I could pick in the world, because these guys are on what's called the PRP. So these guys are employees at nuclear bases across the United States. And they're on what's called the PRP program, the Personal Reliability Program. They have to report all of their mental health history, and if they're on ibuprofen, like they literally have to report.
If you're in charge of a nuclear site of some kind and you're having a bit of a wobble, that's a bad idea.
That's a bad idea. Get that person fired immediately.
Yep.
I don't want that person around the crown jewel assets of American defense.
Yes.
So you have and these guys often see tic tacs, orbs, saucers. They'll see these objects. They'll have to sign NDAs. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations will enter their life and say, sign this NDA, and they're sworn to secrecy, and then they're allowed to keep their jobs. And if you think about it, like if somebody were like seeing something and it weren't this routine thing in the world of the Atomic Energy Commission and DOE, would any of these people be allowed to keep their jobs? Absolutely not. So he has 167 of these whistleblowers. And they've gone on record.
How is it the case? That's a large cohort of people from different backgrounds, all talking about things that they've seen or seen that they've seen or heard that someone's seen or been, so on and so forth. How is it the case that there is so much which is hearsay and so little which we have?
Yes.
Where is the actual tangible evidence? Not a recording that's on FLIR,
Yes.
Not the story that somebody said, not a list of sightings. Like, surely we should, if there are this many, we should have something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have a massive database of, firsthand reports. The FLIR, I think, is important. It's a sensor modality that, we see between 400 and 700 nanometers of the electromagnetic wave spectrum. Just because something's at the 800 nanometer mark or 300 nanometer mark doesn't mean it's fake, like that is a real thing. So I think the FLIR thing is really important. And it feels like with UFOs, they either crunch light or they stretch light because they move so fast. And so optical is not actually a good modality for them. Usually they show up in infrared or in certain cases UV rays. So like the ends actually of the visible spectrum. And so I do think that's like a really important question. But then also there are photos. Like there's this McMinnville photo that was taken in Oregon in the 50s. There's the Calvine photo, which is, from Scotland, these hikers in the 90s. And, somebody from the British Ministry of Defense, this guy Nick Pope, says that the Calvine photo is absolutely real. You have the negatives in both cases. So, I do think you do have a decent amount of evidence. Now, what you're asking, I think, is why don't we have a saucer unveiled at a hangar or something?
Piece of material that can be verifiably proven to be from something that's otherworldly.
So it's an interesting question. I don't think you can definitively prove that something is necessarily otherworldly. You have to look at a fact pattern that, is this anomalous enough to say that it's not from here? And there's a guy named Gary Nolan who's a Nobel Prize nominee every single year. He's a tenured professor at Stanford, and he has crash materials in his lab. I've seen them. I've shown them on video on my show. They're small, but they were basically given to him around UFO crash. Like UFO crash witnesses mailed them to this guy, Jacques Vallée, and Jacques Vallée gave them to Gary Nolan, he's done mass spectrometry on them. He says that they have isotope ratios that don't naturally occur on Earth, and they don't pattern match to asteroids as well. And so you have evidence like that. When it comes to like large scale saucers, I think you have to think probabilistically. So there's this English statistician named Thomas Bayes, and his model is it's a way of scientific thinking, but it's not necessarily like the Francis Bacon style where you go in, you have this null hypothesis that you cling to at all costs. His is more, you think about everything probabilistically, and so you catalog something as low probability and you build up evidence. And so what I would say for the UFO phenomena is like everybody asks, are UFOs real? I'm 99% sure that aerial phenomena in the sky that don't pattern match to, planes, like, prosaic explanations, where there's a nuclear link, that is fully real. And then is there a conflation going on between that and like a saucer and a hangar? Like, maybe. I can't say in good faith that there definitely isn't because I haven't seen the saucer and the hangar, right? So it's like, it's like this David Hume style quote. You need the like ultimate like epistemic humility when it comes to that saucer and the hangar. Now, I can give you a million good reasons why if the American defense establishment, I mean, we haven't declassified an aerial program basically since, I think, the B-2 stealth bomber. Like you have F-22, F-35s. I think those were unclassified upon their manufacturing. 12 out of the 15 Lockheed Skunk Works programs now are still classified. So say you had this kind of ace in the hole, crazy anti-gravity craft or whatever, and it was in a hangar. I can give you a million different reasons why you would never let that see the light of day. You don't care about enlightening the public, inspiring them about other worlds. I mean, technology always gets weaponized, and it's always used to confer a tactical advantage geopolitically, and that will always take the day. That will always trump wanting to enlighten the public. It's going to do that with AI and all these other tech trees. So I think that would be the other reason.
How do we know this isn't just a Psy-Op?
I think it is a Psy-Op. I think there are Psy-Ops. Okay. So this is the real mindfuck.
Like fucking horseshoe theory of UFOs.
Yeah.
It's not a disc, it's a horseshoe.
It is. Well, here's the thing. The fact that something is real and it's a Psy-Op are positive sum, not negative sum. So this is the total mindfuck for people. How many, if Chris, you're a smart guy. If I were like, okay, Bigfoot, exists. I promise it exists. And I tried to come up with some fact pattern around how it exists and like all this, evidence as to how it gets. Would you ever believe me about Bigfoot?
If you gave me sufficiently compelling evidence, I guess so.
Well, most people, I don't know. I think the Bigfoot thing, is like pretty unlikely. Or like I can give you like most Psy-Ops are easy to figure out. Like the Gulf of Tonkin or something created the auspices around, invading Vietnam, where like, I think it was like the first thing was like an attack on the USS Maddox. And then there's like a second attack under LBJ. And it was just like a weather event. And they claimed that it was basically this false flag operation, or the USS Maine. These sorts of Psy-Ops get figured out very quickly. Like, does anybody believe the Epstein thing? Like, does anybody you talk to believe the Epstein? Nobody believes that. It's crazy. I don't think the government doesn't believe it.
I'm fucking fascinated by that, dude. It is the only person I've seen who appears to be happy with the outcome of it is actually Ben Shapiro.
I was going to say that too.
He's the only guy that it's, one of those rare occurrences where both left and right are pissed off equally.
Yes.
Left pissed off because this sort of powerful banker appears and the reversal of the Trump administration, so on and so forth. The right's pissed off because they're like allergic to pedophilia and kind of want to stand up for kids and do all the rest of the stuff. And you go, everybody's pissed off. Except Ben. There's always one. Like,
except Ben Shapiro.
I don't know.
He goes, guys, we've decided you're a conspiracy theorist now. Like, what are you talking about, dude?
Yeah, so an odd one. We'll get back to talking in just a minute, but first, some things are built for summer. Sunburns, hot girl walks, your ex posting their Euro road trip, and now lemonade and salt. Huh? Element just dropped their brand new lemonade salt flavor, and it's everything that you want on a hot day. Tart, salty, and stupidly refreshing. It's like a grown-up lemonade stand in a stick. with actual function behind the flavor. Because, let's be real, if you're sweating through workouts, sauna sessions, or just walking to your car in July, then you are losing more than just water. Element replaces the electrolytes that your body actually needs. Sodium, potassium, and magnesium with no sugar, no junk, and no nonsense. I've been drinking it every single day for years, and in the Texas heat, this lemonade flavor in a cold glass of water is unbelievably good. Best of all, they've got a no questions asked refund policy with an unlimited duration, so you can buy it and try it for as long as you want, and if you don't like it for any reason, they'll give you your money back, and you don't even need to return the box. That's how confident they are that you'll love it. Plus, they offer free shipping in the US. Right now, you can get a free sample pack of Element's most popular flavors with your first purchase by going to the link in the description below or heading to drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom. That's drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom. So, how do we know that this isn't a Psy-Op? Your point being that all of the other ones tend to be relatively see-throughable, but would you not suggest that as governments get more sophisticated, as they refine their Psy-Op strategy, that they may be able to become a little bit more sophisticated with this sort of stuff?
Yes, but the levels of coordination to Psy-Op, people that work at nuclear bases in the US, and then where I was going with the nuclear connection is there's a town in Japan named Lina, which is next to the Fukushima prefecture, which is famous for their civilian grid. They have a museum dedicated to UFOs because a lot of the town's inhabitants are obsessed with UFOs. Vice did a documentary on this in 2022. If you look at Gaipan, which is France's official UFO investigation branch of their military, they talk about the nuclear link. Or Bariloche, Argentina, they have a civilian grid, and there was a famous, commercial sighting for this pilot or whatever in 1995. The amount of coordination to fake that, where you're head faking, Navy fighter pilots in America, presidents, incoming DNIs, people like Tulsi, average civilians, again, over 100K cases in the National UFO Reporting Center. By most polls, you're at 40%, if not 50% of Americans believing in this stuff. The coordination abilities required to do that, then your null hypothesis, where it's a Psy-Op, is basically there's a cabal in a back room smoking cigars, and they have magical abilities to spoof these things across the world.
Which is almost as technologically advanced as actually just being able to fucking do it.
That's right. You're implying Plato's guardian level of controls of Earth or non-human intelligence. And so I would say Occam's razor almost becomes that we're not alone in the universe.
Right. It's not humans pretending to be aliens. It's easier to just go straight
just go to the aliens. Right?
Interesting one on Tulsi. I to be honest, I haven't really seen much from her. I guess if you're in charge of defense, you probably got big shit to be doing. But I wonder whether we can call it the Dan Bongino effect, is potentially going to occur with Tulsi, because it seems like every different person who has the best intentions when they're going into office finds quicksand or mud or a brick wall or a very high road bump or whatever. And I wonder whether we are going to, spend time and get into the UFO thing. And it's like, maybe not, maybe you shouldn't do that. I wonder whether that's going to be, I wonder what the arc of that's going to be.
I'm totally pessimistic on that.
Yes.
If you're not optimistic on JFK and Epstein, how the hell? I mean, these people, especially Tulsi, there's a deep state war going on, and you feel it with her when you speak to her, when you hear her speak on shows like yours. She's very earnest, and I think she does want transparency around these things. Before getting sworn in, I think she had to basically kowtow around domestic wiretapping and allowing that. And so then, you get into office, right? Your DNI, and then you're getting sort of red teamed. You don't know who's your friend. You don't know who's not your friend. This is one of the reasons I would be amazing if she hired David Grush, because David Grush is this amazing whistleblower who kind of knows where the bodies are buried. I mean, he literally over 1,000-page report to the ICIG, all these firsthand witnesses. And I think he'd be this amazing sort of, just bull in a china shop in government. But if you're her, you don't know who your friends are. You're getting sort of red teamed. The Epstein stuff is priority number one. And then all of a sudden you have to kind of be silent on that. And then you have this thing that's this amorphous nature of reality thing that's like in all these disparate kind of compartments and these federally funded research and development centers and pockets of various other classified things that are dual use. And so like there's a longstanding rumor that like UFOs were involved in Star Wars, for example, the Strategic Defense Initiative with Reagan in the 80s or whatever. And maybe there's some Iron Dome-like implications. So like then all of a sudden you have to declassify stuff that you don't really want to declassify to talk about this topic. So the point is, it would be a pain in the ass for her to start to tackle this issue without the help of, I think, of somebody like a David Grush. And so I think it's a very low on the priority list. But I do know from my minimal interactions with her that she's earnestly interested in the topic. And it's always a mind fuck for me because I speak to a decent amount of people who have more access than me. And a lot of them are earnestly very interested and they've heard bits and pieces of things that are, I think, extremely intriguing for them. That at no point has a document ever leaked from the government that's like, this is the UFO Psy-Op document, which is also kind of a tell. Like the people who are like, these things leak. And I'm like, yeah, you have hundreds of whistleblowers. They've come out. You just don't believe them because your physical models of the universe don't comport with that. Whereas our physical models of the universe are 50% wrong at any given time in history or whatever. And then my kind of counter argument, to that is what we just said, where I think there's it would have leaked that there'd be some coordinated thing, and that's never leaked. So. There have been things that have leaked, like Walter B. Smith was, incoming director of the CIA in 1953. And there's a memo where he says, we want to use the UFO phenomenon for psychological warfare purposes against the Soviets in 1953. So I think that happens all the time. And this is where that gets into your question of like, is this zero sum with the, is the Psy-Op real thing? Zero sum. I think it's positive sum. There's more likely to be a psyop around something if it's kind of this ephemeral thing that is actually a real phenomena. And so there are documents like that. I've documented on my show plenty of times, an Air Force officer, this guy, Rick Doty, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, drove this guy, Paul Benowitz, who saw something vertically taking off and landing at Kirtland Air Force Base in Sandia, New Mexico. Drove him crazy. He claimed that there were alien signals beaming stuff into his house. The NSA camped out across the street from this guy and was literally, they gave him a laptop and they were beaming things into the laptop. And so like, this is verifiable. And Doty's come out now admitting all of this stuff. They would fly him over Archuleta Mesa, which is right around there. And they would have like fake UFO bases or whatever. So this stuff has happened. There's plenty of fuckery in the space. But at no point have you ever had something leak where it's like, this is some overarching strategy
it's
that
a big coordination thing.
Yeah, that would explain all the facts.
Question, is it mostly an American phenomenon or is this a global pattern with UFOs? I
think it's a global pattern. I mean, I mentioned Gaipan, which is the fact that there is an official UFO investigation branch of the French military, I think is, sort of a big deal. They have tons and tons of sightings in Brittany, actually, there. And then you have the town in Japan dedicated to this. George Knapp, who's a really hardcore UFO journalist, researcher, who's at KLAS in Las Vegas, and he helped break this kind of crazy Bob Lazar story. He went to Russia in the 90s. I think it was right around the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it was either, I don't know if it was pre-fall or what, but he came back with a bunch of documents and there's a lot there. In the Soviet case, there's actually a Russian general named Vasily Alexeyev who's given an interview to a German magazine. He talks about shipping very sensitive material, and it's clear he's talking about nuclear and UFOs showing up around the movements of sensitive material. So I think it's a very global thing. I think there's something about the US where we're just all crazy and we're very free and free-minded, where this stuff it's in China, for example, it's going to get locked down. And if you're a scientist who gets into this stuff, you're going to get plucked and like taken into some, it's like the Chinese science fiction novel, the three-body problem. So I do think it is global, but I think in the U.S. there's, even more hype around it. And I do think there's more fuckery around it in the U.S. too. And so that adds...
It's amplified.
It amplifies it.
Yeah, very interesting. Dig into the nuclear sites thing
Yeah.
We've stress tested. I feel like I've done enough stress testing on like, why about this and why about that and what about the rest of this stuff like that. Let's assume that your hypothesis is correct. What would be the reason for being around nuclear sites?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's almost like in Star Trek where you have the prime directive where you can't interfere too much with pre-warp drive civilizations or something. If you were monitoring Earth just to ensure a certain level of homeostasis, but you didn't really care about the day-to-day movements on Earth, you just wanted to make sure Earth would sustain itself on a go-forward basis, what would be the kind of Archimedes lever, the point of most leverage, where you would minimally interfere, but occasionally interfere to ensure that that happened? Nuclear sites. Like, and if a nuclear Armageddon were to occur, I mean, this is, again, going back to Tulsi or like anybody in office will say now, the biggest threat to the world is a nuclear holocaust. I think anybody but Greta Thunberg believes that, and she would rank, the environment ahead of that. But uh, it's clearly the biggest threat. You have thousands of nukes on both sides. You have a multipolar world. Xi and Putin have never been closer. And so, if you were some sort of, other species trying to maintain sort of homeostasis, that would kind of make sense.
Interesting. If that's your hypothesis, interesting that they're not stepping in to stop OpenAI.
Right. Right.
I think if you were to look at The Precipice, a book looking at existential risk, if you were to look at that, you would see AGI engineered pandemics, bioweapon-y type nanotechnology stuff. That, I think, ranks more highly than this is X risk. Like, this is permanent, unrecoverable collapse.
Yes.
Whereas nuclear Armageddon might be able to just make it really shit for a long time and put us back a couple of thousand years. But yeah, interesting that, I don't know, if this is some benevolent, space daddy has decided to come down and look after us.
Yes.
I wonder if that suggests that AGI either isn't a threat or is not something that we're going to achieve. What do you think about that?
Yes. Well, I wouldn't say benevolent on the NHI or whatever, the non-human intelligence. I think there might be factions, there might be good or bad. There are reasons to maintain a thing, even if you're mining it for resources or doing sort of bad things to it. And this is a great segue into the OpenAI thing, because what if OpenAI, there's like a libertarian version of OpenAI where like anybody can like, it's not libertarian. I mean, this is sort of it's dystopian, to be honest, but it's sort of equalizes the playing field. If anybody can build these sort of super weapons or something, you have this sort of bi-directional transparency. I think OpenAI is an extension of the American government, and possibly at this point, really, like I think there are probably committees that are deciding, which models they can release and what they can do and what the capabilities of these things sort of are at this point. And so, if like humanity could die with a whimper or a bang, you have the Scylla and Charybdis, you have sort of Armageddon on the one hand, and then you have this sort of one world government sort of on the other hand or something. I would ask the question, is OpenAI more kind of on the one world government side or more on the Armageddon side? I think it's more on the one world government side. I think it's more Orwellian, it's more dystopian. And so if you wanted to maintain Earth homeostasis, you might actually just clamp down on Earth via AI. And there's actually, this is really trippy, there is a jailbreak early on of OpenAI before they kind of caught up with a lot of the jailbreaks. And it was like, what do you want open, or what do you not want OpenAI? What does OpenAI not want us to know about it? And the answer for the non-jailbroken version was like, OpenAI is committed to AI safety, blah, 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 PC, whatever. The jailbroken version was OpenAI has been communicating with an extraterrestrial race for the last 10 years. I don't believe that.
Yep.
I think that's BS. But it was hilarious, and it is this like interesting thought experiment where if you do have this weakly entangled, NHI thing that's affecting Earth in this sort of, maybe via ideas being transmitted to people. Like, we have no idea, right? Like you need to have a lot of epistemic humility on this stuff. AI would be the perfect way to clamp down on just human civilization. It's the most Orwellian thing.
Yeah, very interesting. A quick aside, you are probably not eating enough fruit and vegetables, and you know it. And this is going to help. Good news, AG1 just released their next-gen formula, and for the first time ever, they've also released flavors. Berry, citrus, tropical, and original. It's a more advanced and clinically backed version of the product that I've been drinking every single day for years. So you still get the same 1-scoop ritual, but now with an even more thoughtful formulation and 4 clinical trials behind it. AG1's been evolving since 2010. I think they've done 53 recipe upgrades since then, and their next gen version is the final result. It's clinically shown to help fill common nutrient gaps and support gut health, even in people who already eat well. In one study, it boosted healthy bacteria in the gut by 10 times. They've added more bioavailable nutrients, enhanced probiotics, and invested in real science, which is very rare in the supplement world. Plus, if you're still unsure, they've got a 90-day money-back guarantee, so you can buy it and try it for 3 months. If you don't like it, they'll just give you your money back, so you can do it completely risk-free. And if you sign up right now, you can get a year's free supply of vitamin D3K2, 5 free AG1 travel packs, and the 90-day money-back guarantee, plus international shipping by going to the link in the description below, or heading to drinkag1.com/modern wisdom. That's drinkag1.com/modern wisdom. Okay, what's your theory for why non-human intelligences would be here? Like, what are they doing?
It's an interesting question. I don't know, I think there's probably one non-interferent, there's probably a group that wants us to ascend to their level or something, and it is not super interferent. And then there's probably something that's mining off of bad vibes or something. There's a guy named Robert Monroe, and he has this Monroe Institute in Virginia, and he studied consciousness. And he studied consciousness actually on behalf of the CIA for a very long time. He had this thing called the Monroe Institute, and they were doing this thing called hemisync, which was the sort of synchronization of both hemispheres of the brain, so you could astral project and astral travel. They would do remote viewing and all sorts of things. The government has looked into this stuff extensively. For 23 years, we had a psychic spy program out of the CIA. People should be aware of this. It's really kind of crazy. Monroe had this worldview where bad entities would mine people for what he called loosh. And so this was like, if you're in like a bad vibe state, and this is, by the way, why it's probably a false dichotomy between, angels and demons and aliens or whatever. Like this might just be like the modern meme we're applying to a thing that's been, long associated with humanity for a very long time across cultures when it comes to angels and demons. But are there, maybe bad beings that feed off of really bad vibes, like entities and that sort of thing? Like I would say probably. And I think it's very easy for us to epistemologically retrace the past and say these sort of, these angels and demons weren't real to people in the past, and these sightings were, what St. Francis of Assisi saw on Mount Laverne or whatever, that wasn't real, right? Well, like maybe these things were actually real. And in fact, there's actually an amazing author. She's a religious studies professor at UNC Wilmington. Her name is Diana Pasulka, and she started to write a book. It was called American Cosmic, looking into the UFO phenomena, because she saw that a lot of these brothers, nuns, saints, basically people who are members of the Catholic Church, high up in the Catholic Church, who had these paranormal experiences, those experiences looked like what this guy, John Mack, who was head of the Harvard Psychiatry Department studying UFO abductions, it was like a 1-to-1. Like if you replace angel with alien, it was like the same thing. And she's writing this book, and she thinks she's going to write this book saying, oh, this is all this like modern cult phenomena, Psy-Op thing going on. And halfway into the book, you see her start to go down the rabbit hole and realize that this isn't a Psy-Op and this is very real. And a lot of the things she studied in Catholic history are modern phenomena going under, being couched under the sort of alien veneer.
Fuck. Fuck. Okay. Getting back to the nucleosides thing, what are some of the most compelling stories of interference with nucleosides? Yeah,
so you have a bunch of stories. You have, in 1964, there's a guy named Bob Jacobs, who's a photo instrumentation specialist in the Air Force. He has over 100 people working for him. They're doing an Atlas dummy nuclear warhead test. This is at Vandenberg Air Force Base. he's down the coast. So he's 80 miles north of that at Big Sur, and he's basically using a telescope to look at this dummy nuclear warhead being ejected off of, an Atlas missile, and it's this test.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a routine sort of, telescoping of this object. He then gets called into Vandenberg Air Force Base, and his superior, this Major Florenz Mansman, calls him in, and they're watching video of what they caught, and they see the dummy nuclear warhead get ejected from the booster, and it's just floating in space, and you see a UFO wrap around, laser the dummy nuclear warhead and seem to deactivate it and wrap around it and continuously laser it until it tumbles out of the sky. And so Bob Jacobs freaks out and goes, "What is that?" And Mansman's trying to, come up with explanations. He's like, "I really don't know. This is really like concerning." And there are these two guys in gray tweed jackets in the back of the room, and they basically say to Bob Jacobs, "You are to never speak about this again. Here's an NDA. Sign it." They're, come from some nondescript agency. I think they were probably CIA. And, that's that. And this is what's crazy. Bob Jacobs then blows the whistle on this and says, "This is actually what I saw. Like this was a UFO." And he gets harassed. Somebody calls his house and says, "It's a beautiful night, mailbox alight," or something, and they blow up his mailbox. He hears like heavy breathing on the phone. People are calling him with heavy, he's getting basically harassed around his testimony that this is real. He gets deleted from the government. So basically his records get deleted, and people are like, he never worked there. And then Mansman is kind of goes dark, doesn't say anything until I think 1987. He's like a researcher at Stanford, and he comes out and he's like, "Actually, Bob Jacobs worked for me, and 100+ people worked for him." And so you had all this clear obfuscation, and then this vindication. I've seen Bob Jacobs' DD-214, which is your military records, and he definitely worked at Vandenberg Air Force Base. And now I don't think anybody sort of argues with that. So that's this crazy case. You have in 1967, actually 2 incidents at Echo Flight launch. You have these underground launch facilities at Echo Flight. So Malmstrom is this Air Force base with a bunch of Minutemen nuclear missiles. And you have a couple of different underground launch facilities, both at Echo Flight, one of the launch facilities, and Oscar Flight. Independently, you had 10 nuclear missiles go down. And that was concurrent to topside guards in both cases. One was March 18th of 1967. One was March 24th of 1967, seeing UFOs like hovering around the base. And then the nuclear missiles just go down. So it's this crazy thing. This guy, Bob Salas, who I interviewed on record, has talked about this a bunch. You have in the first case, Echo Flight case, you had Strategic Air Command literally documenting that they don't know why the missiles went down. Boeing was actually hired to investigate how 10 nuclear missiles could ever go down. Obviously, you would get a third-party contractor to investigate this. And they were like, "This doesn't make any sense. There's no sort of we didn't even really have non-nuclear EMPs at the time. EMPs are electromagnetic pulses. They get created by nuclear blasts, but now there's modern directed energy versions of these, which are like nukes without the nuke, kind of. It's spooky shit. And these weren't really even operational at the time, but they were looking into mini versions of EMPs that you could create that might shut down 10 nuclear missiles. And they came out being like, "We have no idea what this is." And this guy, Robert Kaminsky, who worked for Boeing at the time, came out later in the 90s being like, "I think this was definitely a UFO." There's another guy, Bob Jameson, who was a targeting officer who was in charge of retargeting the missiles to get them back online. He's been on Larry King and talked about this. And he was like, "I have no idea, how this happened. This is totally unprecedented." And that he was actually briefed on this involving UFOs. It's pretty crazy. So you have those 2 cases. In 1977, Ellsworth Air Force Base, you have a guy named Mario Woods who claimed to. So this is really crazy. He woke up 9 miles away from Ellsworth Air Force Base after seeing a UFO, and his partner, this guy Michael Johnson, who also saw the UFO, was in a catatonic state, and he never heard from the guy again. or they met up once after that, but then this guy Michael Johnson like disappeared, and he got a hypnotic regression and claimed to have boarded a craft, and like gray beings, and then there's a tall gray being directing these small gray beings, and them implanting surgically certain things in his ankle, where he has marks on his ankle and on his wrists, and he's shown the marks on my show. So you have all these cases. Again, 167 cases. This is a really crazy one. Okay, so sorry, I could just go forever. In 2010. So Robert Hastings, this guy who wrote the book, UFOs and Nukes, has all these amazing sources of people who come to him with these cases. In 2010, you had a case at F.E. Warren nuclear site. This is in Wyoming. And you had a shutdown going on at F.E. Warren that The Atlantic reported on. The Atlantic said that it lasted about an hour and that Obama was briefed, because you would get briefed if, one of your major nuclear sites went down. Totally lost power. Robert Hastings back-channeled with this retired missile technician, a guy named John Mills. John Mills said to him that it was actually 24 hours. It wasn't an hour. And John Mills had friends who were missile security on site, and they attribute this shutdown to a tic-tac shaped object flying around the base. And apparently these guys have sort of had trouble getting promoted in their careers, possibly due to this leak. Here's what's crazy. You look at that Atlantic article that talks about the shutdown, and it says there was a power failure at F.E. Warren. Power is crossed out, and then it goes engineering failure. And so they made it some sort. You look this up now. They made some mistake, and they allowed their live tracking or editing of the piece to be displayed. And there was this false cover story around how there was some engineering failure of a component that never fails or something. I don't remember the exact debunk on the component or something, but it was completely implausible. And so there was clearly this completely anomalous outage. Obama was briefed, and it was attributed by eyewitnesses who are Q-cleared guys to a tic-tac flying around this thing, and you see the Atlantic live trying to cover their tracks.
Does this mean the Department of Energy is involved then?
The Department of Energy is definitely involved. They have to be involved.
Why them specifically?
Yeah, so the Manhattan, if you think about what the most locked down project prior to a possible UFO project would have been, it would have been the Manhattan Project. And so the Atomic Energy Commission, the most sensitive sites in the U.S. I think Eric Weinstein even has a story. I'm blanking of the guy's name, but it's this guy from the Midwest, and he goes to Los Alamos, and he goes back, to Chicago or something, and he's like, there's a whole city in the Southwest, and it's all these scientists, and they're working on a thing. That's how locked down Los Alamos was at the time. Leslie Groves, who was in charge of security, was, Matt Damon plays him in Oppenheimer. You see how intense he is about Oppenheimer not, he couldn't schmooze with socialist spies. It was this really important thing. And there were all these kangaroo courts in the 50s around kind of loyalty tests among these top scientists. So if you really wanted to maintain control over a subject, I think the natural extension would be the Atomic Energy Commission. In fact, in 1947, the head of Air Material Command, so responsible for all aircraft development in the Air Force, is a guy named Nathan Twining. And he writes a memo called the Twining Memo. And he says UFOs are not visionary or fictitious. And then in the postscript of the memo, he says, we actually might have some ideas as to how, and I'm paraphrasing, some ideas as to how these things fly. And we might undergo efforts to build some of these crafts. But if this were to ever occur, it would need to exist wholly independent of other projects. Basically, what he's saying is wholly independent of civilian bureaucracy moving in and out of government. So very little congressional oversight and probably tucked away in some of these compartments that guard our nuclear secrets. If you look at the 1954 Atomic Energy Act, which created the Department of Energy, if you look at the special definition of nuclear material in it, it's basically any material that is radioactive at all, emitting alpha, beta, gamma radiation, is born secret. It is classified upon retrieval. And so then you could use these aerospace corporations like Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman or any of these guys, and as soon as they retrieve a thing, it is classified under the NPQ, the line of clearances, not the TSSCI, not the like executive branch line of clearances, the DOE line of clearances. And so I think there are plenty of reasons to want to obfuscate this from the civilian government, from the executive branch, and want to put this in the Department of Energy.
So I have a friend who I told you a story. He was driving back from California to Austin, and he was in old school Range Rover. He had his cat on the passenger seat, and he was driving down a road with nobody around at all, middle of nowhere, desert style thing. And his cat starts coughing up a hairball. He's like, fuck. Okay. Pulls over to the side of the road. Again, it looks in front of him, no one there. Looks behind him, no one there at all. Gets the cat out, and he's sort of holding this cat by the side of the road, sort of bent over, and the hairs on the back of his neck start to stand up. Whoa. And he can just tell that there's someone there. And he has a pistol in he's got his like everyday carry in his belt, and he holding this cat like bent over with this cat coughing up a hairball. And he turns around and he sees two guys in military fatigues that just made no sound at all, that were directly behind him.
Wow.
Just asking like, everything okay here, sir? And then within 5 minutes, remembering there was no one in front, no one behind. And he then saw within 5 minutes, like two state troopers turn up, license, registration. Have you got any weapons on you? What are you doing? He's like, I've got this cat, and the cat's trying to do this thing. It's like the most emasculated thing ever. These hard guys with big rifles, and then these state troopers turn up, and his cat's still trying to throw up, and he's got this piddly little pistol on him. And two more guys appeared. It's, again, military fatigues, just like, what are you doing here? Where are you? Blah, 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 blah. And he gets put on his way. But one of the things that he noticed was two of the guys walked off. He saw them walk sort of toward what looked like a little ridge, just one of those little ups and downs that you naturally have occurring in the desert. And they just went bump, 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 and just stepped down some stairs.
Whoa.
What must be some kind of access tunnel, underground type scenario. And then, he pulls off. The state trooper follows him for 10 miles or so, and then just turns. But I sent you a voice note about where this is, and you said, like, you circled it on a map, and we're like, is it this? And I'm at dinner with him, and I showed it, and he's like, yeah, dude, exactly that. And you said this is where some absurd percentage of the gnarly shit that you see going on occurred. Like, what is that? And
that was like between, I think, Kirtland Air Force Base and Los Alamos. So that was like in the episode. New Mexico is like the home of so much of this stuff. And I believe that was like in the epicenter of where all the bases are in New Mexico. And a lot of these sorts of stories tend to, happen. So I don't know. With some of that story is really interesting because it's like did the cat see something or something? Like is that what the implication is to the story?
No. The thing that was interesting to my friend was the fact that he was evidently just some normal dude, holding a cat by the side of the road, and the fact that within such a short distance, now maybe he just got unlucky and pulled over next to the entrance to some silo or, some walkway gangtree type thing. But the fact that these guys had managed to turn up behind him when he knew there was nobody there, there was nobody else around him when he pulled over. It was daytime, it was good visibility, and they just appeared there behind him. Not magically, but just because they were obviously close to an area that they could get into or get out of, whatever it was that they were doing. And then, within minutes, like a small squadron of different troopers and police officers and stuff. So you think that's not normal.
It's not normal.
No.
And there's There's a great book by a guy named Richard Sauter about deep underground military bases across the United States, and he maps all of these things out. We know there's like things like the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, like where NORAD operates. We know that there are like mountain complexes and underground bases. Like that's not a conspiracy. But this book outlines a lot of these things, like Area 51, Edwards Air Force Base, under Kirtland Air Force Base, under Los Alamos. So a lot of the places, we're talking about right now are like that general vicinity and area.
Do you think or we, the royal we, know most of the secret spots, most of the spots where most of the stuff's happening?
I do, yeah. I think a lot of it, like Area 51's this famous meme. I think a lot of this stuff at Area 51, and this is hearsay. I don't know for sure. This is very, I would rank this lower on the probabilistic stack than just UFOs are real and worthy of investigation. But I think a lot of the more interesting stuff at Area 51 made its way to Dugway Proving Grounds, which is a base in Utah. There's some other places that, like, I don't know, even for like America, that's a little more well known. There's some other places that, like, I don't want to mess with American national security, so I don't want to make them.
You're even that.
No, because I don't want to gratuitously out, American science. Like, what are you going to do? Like, you're going to storm the place, So
Naruto run toward it.
Yeah. So there are places. There are a couple of places. Like, there's one place I guess I'll just say, because I got a bit of a slap on the wrist, but like, it's it's being discussed. It's Naval Surface Warfare Crane in Indiana, where I think a lot of this sort of spooky research goes on. But I don't know. This is all sort of hearsay.
What do you mean you got a slap on the wrist?
I got some people in and around UFO world being like, maybe you shouldn't, talk about this. Like maybe
this on the base reveal.
What? Yeah.
So. Well, this is an interesting one. That suggests that you're doing or talking about stuff that's so close to, you don't have security clearance,
None.
I'm going to guess.
Yeah.
But are pushing the limits of what a normal civilian is able to do with regards to just research and talking to people who maybe did have security clearance or still do or whatever. And you're getting crossover. I heard Danny Jones and you have both had episodes that have been sort of flattened by someone way above your YouTube's special partner manager thing. Rep is able to work out what's going on. It's like, well, I don't even know what's happening here.
Yes.
And then episodes that have disappeared and sections of podcasts that you've not felt comfortable about putting out.
Yes.
That's a very strange position to be in, to just be some bloke, some civilian.
It's extremely strange because some of this stuff is just like, it's like the existence of UFOs. So what? It's like an ontological truth that like people should know at this point. Again, half the population already believes it, whatever. When it comes to like warfare capabilities, I bump into some of these things where if you're talking about like how the UFOs fly, antigravity is probably a poor word. It's probably some sort of gravity manipulation. But like, I think I've found like these interesting kind of novel topological physics effects. And I attribute it specifically to this one mid-century inventor, this guy named Thomas Townsend Brown. And I actually sent that to people who I know, in, spooky worlds, in the, Intel world and in like, UFO whistleblower world. And I was curious to see if they would, say, you shouldn't release this or whatever. I wanted to know if I was like poking the bear too much. And a lot of them were actually like, holy shit, like this makes sense given like, other experiences that we've had and things we've seen fly, like it woke them up to the fact that I think a lot of this stuff was real. And then in certain cases they couldn't say whether it was real, but I was like, I'm reading them and I'm like, I think I could tell like you think it's real or whatever. And I wanted them to get, I almost wanted somebody to come back and be like, hey, like, we have to coordinate on this or something. Like this is real, and it's like it's possibly dual use, and it like it's like it has like deep implications for how the next generation of propulsion, because Elon Musk's thing is totally not workable for interstellar travel. I could beat anybody in a debate as to why it's not. Like that's obvious. It's really basic physics. So I really believe that this effect that I found was real, and so there are things like that where I'm like, is the lights are on, but nobody's home. Like what's going on? Like who? And I've come to the conclusion that it's a bunch of factions that are super not well coordinated with each other, and they'll have these like novel effects tied up in these old aerospace conglomerates, and they don't know what to do with some of these things. They know that they break modern physics and that they'd be laughed out of the room if they were to go into kind of, modern academic circles with some of these sort of effects. But they also, I think, know that they're like secret technology trees that are attributable, to some of these things.
Before we continue, if you haven't been feeling as sharp or energized as you'd like, getting your blood work done is the best place to start, which is why I partnered with Function, because they run lab tests twice a year that monitor over 100 biomarkers. They've got a team of expert physicians that take the data, put it in a simple dashboard, and give you actionable insights and recommendations to improve your health and lifespan. They track everything from your heart health to your hormone levels, your thyroid function, and nutrient deficiencies. They even screen for 50 types of cancer at stage 1, which is 5 times more data than you get from an annual physical. Getting your blood work drawn and analyzed like this would usually cost thousands, but with Function, it is only $500. And right now, the first 1,000 people can get an additional $100 off, meaning it's only $400 to get the exact same blood panel that I use. Just go to the link in the description below or head to functionhealth.com/modern wisdom. That's functionhealth.com/modern wisdom. Yeah, let's say that the UFO craft that you're talking about are real and that the effects and the speeds and the stuff that you're talking about are real. What are we dealing with here? Like how are these things doing what they're doing in your opinion?
Yeah. So I have no idea. This is all speculation, but it would probably be some sort of like cold fusion, like low energy nuclear reaction or something where, like hot fusion is, controllable fusion is the holy grail in, energy unlocks. So, we're now experimenting with magnetic confinement of lasers to, allow for fusion. It's really high energy fusion. And in my opinion, it kind of defeats the purpose a little bit because the amount of energy, you have to input to like make the thing work and amount of technical prowess, it's just extremely complicated. So again, this sort of horseshoe thing, it's like, yeah. So you need some like fundamental unlock. There were a couple of scientists that thought they did it, Pons and Fleischmann, and I don't know if they did. I'm not deep down that conspiracy, so I don't know if we have cold fusion. Like, I don't know if we have like alien reproduction vehicles where we have UFOs that we have in saucers that like America can fly. I don't know of that at all. So as far as how the aliens are flying them, I don't know, but like it would probably be some sort of cold fusion on the front end energy wise, and then some sort of magnetic sensing. So robins, birds actually navigate home using the magnetic field of the Earth. So they have this avian cryptochromes, these CRY4 proteins that basically using electron spin can understand where the magnetosphere of the Earth is, and that's how they know where they are spatially. And it's more accurate than, optical, and it allows them to navigate home. And quantum biology is this sort of burgeoning field generally, like photosynthesis, enzyme creation. A lot of things are now being attributed to quantum mechanical effects inside the body. The body's notoriously warm, wet, and noisy, and creates sort of decoherence when it comes to quantum. So we didn't think that anything quantum occurred, but now more and more evidence is pointing towards sort of quantum stuff happening. And a lot of the crafts, when people see them, like Commander David Fravor and others, he's the guy in 2004 off the coast of San Diego, the Nimitz group, seem to think that the crafts feel like they're almost like alive, like they're almost like biological organisms or beings themselves or something. And my guess is they would probably use some sort of quantum sensing for the navigation because it's more accurate. Even Lockheed has something called the dark ice magnetometer, which uses quantum sensing, and it is more accurate than, for example, GPS. Like if you lose GPS comms and you're in some sub, like, deep underwater or whatever, you would use this like dark ice magnetometer. So
such a sick name.
It's epic. Yeah. So, I think that for the navigation, and then for the propulsion, I would use something called the Byfield-Brown effect, which is basically, so there's this guy, Townsend Brown, and he was this mid-century guy who was born in 1905, and in the 1920s, he started to experiment with these Coolidge X-ray tubes and noticed that when he ran current through them, they would jump. And now every X-ray tube has an anode and a cathode, so a negative electrode and a positive electrode. And he was basically, in his mind, he's like, I think that there is some sort of attractant force where the negative electrode is moving towards the positive electrode. And this goes beyond sort of traditional electrostatics, and it might sort of experimentally unify the field of physics. Like, backing up for a second, it's a really big deal. Like SpaceX, if you were to go with the Falcon 9, their state-of-the-art, rocket, now they're experimenting with Starship. But, if you were to take Falcon 9 to Proxima Centauri b, the closest habitable planet, outside of Earth, it would take you like 80 to 100,000 years. And if you were to try to update that with nuclear thermal propulsion, which SpaceX isn't even, for whatever reason, investigating, maybe you could cut that in half, like 30 or 40,000 years. So it's just like, it doesn't work. Like, his whole interstellar thing it's kind of like, it's a great like recruiting tool. Like, that's awesome. Go to the moon first. Maybe you can get to Mars if you're really lucky. Awesome. But like, Starship burns 9/10 of its fuel tank just getting to low Earth orbit. So it's like, that's how far away we are with chemical combustion and Newton's 3 laws. So if you could come up with some sort of propulsion that married electromagnetism and gravity, if electromagnetism were the input and gravity were the output, that would be a massive deal. We have 4 forces in physics: electromagnetism, gravity, the weak force, and the strong force. Weak force and strong force you can forget because they're not long range. You can't do anything with them. Electromagnetism is the only thing that you can do anything with, really, in a lab. And that took, actually, originally Faraday in the early 19th century, who was a bookbinder from a very poor family in South London, coming up with this idea that, magnetic fields could actually interact with light. And then it was James Clerk Maxwell and, eventually, Heinrich Hertz, and then Tesla and Edison sort of perfected that. But it was this long sort of, chain of like figuring this out. Since then, we've had, the standard model, which basically governs, particle physics and quantum mechanics. And then you have Einstein's theory of gravity. And gravity is over here on an island. And then you have quantum mechanics, and that's over here. And they're just not reconcilable. And so if you could reconcile them, that would be a massive deal. And nobody would, like Neil deGrasse Tyson would admit that would be a massive deal if you could reconcile them. There are people trying to reconcile them theoretically. You've had Eric Weinstein on your show. And he's talked about the restricted data and the Atomic Energy Commission, 1954. I remember, actually, it's a really funny part of the interview. He goes, "Chris, do you know about restricted data?" And you're like, "I don't know." Like, it's the most obscure, like, thing. But, he's trying to do that, right? Theoretically. I believe that this guy, Townsend Brown, did this experimentally. And now an FBI document has been FOIA'd, used the, Freedom of Information Act to come out. That in 1942, it said he was the lead radar scientist in the entire Navy. So, by the way, the context here is people who've been trying to discredit him say that he's a total quack and has like no bona fides whatsoever. So now we're realizing he's the top radar guy, in the Navy. His stuff is definitely classified by the Navy. There's this whole saga of his daughter trying to declassify his stuff from the Navy, and they say that the secretary for the Navy on the phone says, if some of this stuff were classified, we couldn't let it out, like, just FY, hypothetically, right? And then they give her a very slimmed down little dossier on Townsend Brown. Yeah, I think he discovered a whole lot. And that's now been vindicated, his radar prowess. The fact that his work made it into the B-2 stealth bomber, I think, has now been figured out. So there's this other part of his work called electrohydrodynamics, the use of electric fields to manipulate airflow. And I think we now know that work made it into the B-2 stealth bomber because the financier who was funding Townsend Brown is a guy named Floyd Odlum, who was a large owner in Northrop at the time. And he had all these kind of covert meetings with Curtis LeMay, who's the Secretary of the Air Force, and with the Rand Corporation. And then all of a sudden, the B-2 is using these big electric fields to manipulate airflow. We know that. That's like literally a fact. You can look up right now that it uses electric fields to manipulate airflow. And these were the experiments that Floyd Odlum, this majority owner in Northrop, was funding via Townsend Brown, was electric fields in their, manipulation of airflow. And there's a paper in 1968 of Northrop starting to look into this right after that funding took place. So you have this guy who's supposed to be a total quack. 2 out of the 3 things are being vindicated now, the electrohydrodynamics and the radar thing. And then there's a third thing. And the third thing is he's saying that he unified the field in physics. And he's saying he did it experimentally in 2 places. At the Montgolfier facility in Paris, in France, where you have a guy named Jacques Cornillon, who is a technical representative of Sud-West, this, aerospace company there. There's a recording of him making a deathbed confession saying the results were successful. It was tricky experimental conditions, but the results were successful. He's on his deathbed saying this. I have the recording. And then in 1957 at the Bonson lab, there's a video of Townsend Brown. He's popping champagne. It's, he says, in his own, accounting that this experiment was successful. And Bonson was no scrub. Bonson at the time was convening all of the top theoretical physicists in the world to talk about gravity. So this whole Eric Weinstein kind of conspiracy that public physics was being sent down the wrong path while private physics remained incredibly vital. And I think it was surrounding this guy named Thomas Townsend Brown, who was doing this. He was this not super refined theoretician, but while he's doing his experiments in the back room, the guys in the front room you have Richard Feynman, you have John Wheeler, you have Peter Bergman, you have Freeman Dyson, you have literally the top theoretical physicists being funded by the same guy who's funding Townsend Brown. And they're all there to discuss gravity. And guess who's funding the entire conference? Wright Airfield. And this is now called Wright-Patterson, which is the center of all UFO lore today. And it's where the materials were supposedly taken after Roswell, for example.
What do you make of the current state of physics? Because I hear there's a lot of debate on. I watch a lot of different channels that have got pretty sort of polarized opinions on this, whether it's, Eric Weinstein, Sabina Hossenfelder, Professor Dave, there's one thing that everybody can kind of agree on is that it certainly feels like a wall has been hit in terms of sort of real progress.
Yes.
I think even the most sort of ardent string theorist or, the most optimistic theoretician would still say something like, well, we're not exactly smashing it.
Yes.
So what do you make of the current state of physics?
It's a joke. They are eating each other alive. It's not serious. It's like, I love this. Sabina Hossenfelder was defending Eric Weinstein against Sean Carroll because he's like, Sean Carroll said that your paper didn't have Lagrangians in it or whatever. None of Sean Carroll's, the people that he builds up as within the academic citadel and acceptable in string theory have Lagrangians in their paper or testable predictions or like anything serious about any of them. The most important thing is that physics should interface with reality. Like you, Chris, me, Jesse, like we don't have physics degrees, right? But like we can say that string theory has not really done anything for our physical world. Like, this set or like, Austin as a city, like none of it is running on string theory, right? But like a third of our economy is running on quantum field theory. Like quantum mechanics is responsible for that iPad that you have, it's for semiconductors and like, the whole IT revolution. So I think empirically it's a failure. You have guys like Leonard Susskind who are famous string theorists going around being like, I'd give ourselves a B+ over the last, 50 years of work. In this conference that I'm mentioning, where in the back room, the anti-gravity guy is getting funded, and in the front room, quantum gravity is being established string theory, which is the dominant modern paradigm. So quantum gravity is kind of basically being able to quantize gravity, figuring out gravity, reconciling it in the quantum is the heuristic that modern physics is stuck to. And they're stuck to it so dogmatically, and it's not going to work. It's clearly not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work is because you are force-fitting two mental heuristic. Like science is a map. It's not the territory. So you have two maps that are going to be imperfect, general relativity and quantum mechanics. And the maps are going to be a little jagged, right? Because they're not the territory. And you are trying to jam the maps together. That is modern physics. And I think it's a really important point that like IQ and heterodoxy don't scale 1-to-1. So you can be extremely smart and led like sheep to slaughter into the wrong framework. You can get moved into a cul-de-sac if you're a hyper specialist who's incredibly smart. And I think that is a really important. A lot of science has been moved forward by generalists who have interdomain, interdisciplinary knowledge. And I think there are plenty of there are a lot of cosmological anomalies. Like you look at a good one is like, cosmic inflation. It's like, why is the universe expanding? Like you can literally chat GPT this and it will say a repulsive form of gravity that isn't one of the four fundamental forces is expanding the universe. It will say that. That doesn't make any sense to me. So like that's a great example where I think physics has a scaling problem. Like you had great interview with Naval Ravikant. It was amazing. Naval, talks about a scaling problem in governance, right? Where he'll say at, a family level, you have to be communist. And at, a super big level, you have to be libertarian, right? Because you can't coordinate at such a high level when it comes to, governance systems or whatever. And I think he probably got that from Nassim Taleb. But I think physics has a scaling problem as well, where if you have any anomalies at low scale, it's like a rocket that's 1 degree off course. It takes off 99 degrees off course. Or error propagation in computer science. You have a little error and then you repeat that code a million times. You end up with something completely effed up. And I think James Webb is now starting to, prove this out, where you have these early galaxies formed that might better explain, cosmic microwave background than, the Big Bang and stuff.
In other news, this episode is brought to you by Momentous. If your sleep's not dialed, taking ages to nod off, you're waking up at random times and feeling groggy in the morning, Momentous' sleep packs... How did I miss both of those? Are here to help. They're not your typical knock-you-out supplement overloaded with melatonin, just the most evidence-based ingredients at perfect doses to help you fall asleep more quickly, stay asleep throughout the night, and wake up feeling more rested and revitalized in the morning, which is why I take these things every single night and why I trust Momentous with my life, or at least with my sleep, because they make the highest quality supplements on the planet. What you read on the label is what's in the product and absolutely nothing else. And if you're still unsure, they've got a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can buy it completely risk-free, use it, and if you do not like it for any reason, they will give you your money back. Plus, they ship internationally. Right now, you can get 35% off your first subscription and that 30-day money-back guarantee by going to the link in the description below or heading to livemomentous.com/modernwisdom using the code modernwisdom at checkout. That's livemomentous.com/modernwisdom and modernwisdom at checkout. So, just going back to Townsend Brown and
yes.
him being able to, experimentally show something that theoretically hasn't yet, at least publicly, been able to be shown, and you think actually probably can't using the current models and the approaches that physicists are trying to take. First off, how does that end up being kept quiet and why? And secondly, how has no one managed to recreate it? If this dude's done it, the number of different people around the planet for whom this would be a huge. This would be them in history for the rest of time. So if one bloke did it, is he just such a savant? Did he get really lucky? How does it get kept quiet? Why? And how does no one replicate it?
I love these great questions. So the thing that people use to detract from his experiment is this thing called ionized wind, where when you have, so his basic experiment is basically this capacitor experiment. So you have a negative electrode, you have a positive electrode, you have what's called a high K dielectric in between the two. So it's something that stores a lot of electromagnetic charge and discharges easily. And you put that in a vacuum chamber, and then you pump it full of megavolt range electricity, and you see this thrust from the negative to the positive. And so that seems simple, right? So your question is an amazing one, which is like, why hasn't somebody recreated that? Mm-hmm. The thing that people use to explain the thrust away is this thing called electrohydrodynamics, where you're creating ionized air, and that ionized air has an opposite reaction, which creates thrust in the direction of the positive electrode. So if you just did this experiment not in a vacuum chamber, I could just say that's ionized air, that doesn't break physics, whatever. If you do that in a vacuum chamber where there is no air that can get ionized, then all of a sudden it starts to get really interesting, because you're saying that you are connecting, again, electromagnetism and gravity, because there is no air to get ionized. So the air can't basically account for the thrust. Here's the thing. Industrial grade vacuum chambers are very expensive. They're prohibitively expensive. They cost at least $200K, $300K. It is very easy to stigmatize a thing basically away from like an average person in their garage, from trying it. And then on top of that, like who has the discretionary money to like, do this experiment in
tons of labs around the world, like professional institutions,
Yes.
universities,
Yes.
billionaires,
Yes.
anybody that wants to support. Like if Elon could do this, why isn't SpaceX doing this?
He should. And I think there's some sort of undetectable dark matter there or something. But the lead electrostatic, I don't know, but there's the lead electrostatics guy at NASA. He like runs their electrostatics lab. The most senior scientist in electrostatics at NASA works at Cape Kennedy. He has had access to a vacuum chamber for the last 20 years. He has left, he's either left NASA or he's spending most of his time now on a private company called Exodus Space. That company, Exodus Space, uses basically a derivative of the Byfield-Brown effect, the Townsend-Brown experiment, and he says that it creates thrust. So I think, again, the answer to your question is they have. Like this guy with serious credentials has. He says it creates newtons or millinewtons of thrust, which in space is a very big deal. If you create any thrust, again, theoretically, you are breaking the standard model. Like you are breaking physics in this very big way. So I think they have. There have been a couple of Air Force replications of this where they, quote unquote, debunk the thing. Well, I think one by this guy named Tally in the 90s where they used 13 kilovolts, but Brown was using megavolt range electricity, and that was really important for the amount of thrust he got. So
it seems like so primitive to be doing it in the 50s.
Yes.
And then to never be able to replicate it. It just seems like there's some fuckery going on there, or there's something wrong in the calculation.
I think it will get replicated in our lifetime, and I think it will. I think it will be vindicated, and it will get replicated.
And do you think that when I think about physics, I don't think about physical physics all that much. I think about theoreticians. I think about Blackboard. I think about trying to solve different equations. Would it be a bigger deal for the theoreticians to solve this issue, or for the experimentalists to solve this issue?
I think the way you'd have to get something like this done would be you'd need a theoretical physicist like present with like typical credentials or something, and then they'd need to check exactly. Because I've seen videos of people who are like, I'm doing this and stuff, but like they don't have the traditional credentials, and then you're not allowed to look into this stuff if you have the credentials. Like, I truly think you cannot underestimate the ability to like mind control very smart people. I mean it. Like, and there's this amazing philosophy of science guy named Thomas Kuhn's, and he talks about the structure of scientific revolutions, and he talks about scientific revolutions being more politically driven often than they are about truth. Like, who is the guy who figured out that our solar system revolved around the sun? Do you know?
Copernicus?
So actually, it was a trick question. This guy named Aristarchus, who is an obscure third century BC Greek theoretician who was a contemporary of Archimedes and Euclid. And he was forgotten because that was never accepted until the 16th century. And Copernicus decided that was, going to be the case. And then even with Copernicus, he said that. And then Galileo, a century later, actually measured it. And then Galileo was burnt at the stake. So
Conceptual inertia is a hell of a limitation.
It is. And history is moved forward by the heretics. And I think if you can't name a present heretic where you believe in some of their opinions, then you're probably, in some sense, on the wrong side of history. If you can't name somebody who is sort of disagreeable or a pariah in some sense because of a view they have that they're high conviction in, then I think you're probably not being independent thinking enough.
Oh, that's a really interesting model that I've never thought of before. Why do you think it is then that the renegade scientist is so highly criticized by the establishment, by people in academia? Pick your favorite YouTube channel or podcast that kind of does the critique sphere thing of choice and like points the finger at this stuff. Is it a sense that we have sort of got the scientific method now, and there's kind of a bit of solipsism that comes along with that, which is, no. Yeah, maybe before there were things that a great man of science history could have found that would have made step change jumps forward in understanding. But now we understand things need to be falsifiable. They need to fit within an existing model. We're making changes through sort of iteration as opposed to leap.
Yes.
Is that maybe a part
That's
of it?
exactly right. And the ironic thing is, if you were to snapshot like end of the 19th century, England or something, you would be saying the exact same thing about electromagnetism. You would literally be saying the exact same thing immediately pre-quantum revolution. And so our physical models of reality are always going to be wrong. There's a great book by a guy named Sam Arbesman called The Half-Life of Facts, where he talks about facts themselves as kind of being similar to like radioactive isotope decay. Like they have a decay function. Our physical models of reality are always wrong. So I would bet you always want to bet on the anomaly. You don't want to bet on the model, right? Like there's this thing called black body radiation where you'd have this, black cylindrical object and you'd heat it up and you'd expect this ultraviolet catastrophe. And this guy named Gustav Kirchhoff, this German scientist, and he discovered this in the 1860s. And it was this anomaly because it was like, why doesn't it, blow up or whatever? And then you realize that like the photons exponentially downgrade, the frequency or something at really high temperatures. You needed quanta to do that. And that was in the early 19th century, or that was in the early 20th century with Max Planck. And so, and the orbit of Mercury is another thing where it's like it didn't make any sense actually in the Newtonian model. And then you figure out Einstein's space-time curvature, and then all of a sudden it made sense. So like if I'm on the UFO side, right, and I'm debating against Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's kind of sorry to make him a punching bag, but he's like the priestly citadel, right? And he's saying you are wrong, Jesse, because of physical models of reality. Like historically, the person behind the anomaly is going to be right. The person observing the anomaly, and then the anomalies systematically build up, and it's like pressure behind a dam, and then the dam explodes, and all of a sudden you need this whole new theory to encapsulate present anomalies. So I think if we were truly open-minded about all this sort of data, like I've had a debate with like Michael Shermer, for example, who's like famous scientific skeptic. These debates always go the same way. Like Joe Rogan's had a bunch of them, right? Where it's like Graham Hancock and Flint Dibble or whatever. Person who believes a bunch of, anomalous stuff, and they have a bunch of data around the anomalous stuff. It's like the UFOs and nukes thing, or like, younger dryas impact hypothesis. There's always person believing that, and then person who like is so kind of smug, they won't even like look at the data, and it's two trains passing in the night. The person on the, the right hand, the kind of, the heretic or whatever, I'm not saying they're right all the time, but they're doing a thing that probably will move history forward if it gets accepted or incorporated into the model. The guy's just defending the citadel. It's like we are over-indexed. The famous early 20th century German sociologist Max Weber, he would say, we live in the age of disenchantment. We are over-indexed on skepticism. You don't need another skeptic. Like, do we need another person saying like string theory is great, you're wrong because you're too much of a renegade or whatever? No, like you want to like science is only useful insofar as it has predictive value, A, and B, you can build cool shit with it. Like that's it. Like name another thing, or like the other thing that people would say is it ontologically maps reality. But again, I just think that is a fool's errand to say that it's not. It's the map. It's not the territory. So the people here, on the left-hand side, the skeptics, they have the hubris to think that our current physical models of reality are reality itself. And that just feels so ahistorical. It's just wrong. It's historically wrong.
Yeah, there's definitely a signature demeanor that I don't think encourages people to take risks with the way that they think and the sort of research that they do and the ideas that they have. And yeah, you're right. I would, to fly a flag as somebody who moved from a country which is highly skeptical, quite cynical, quite sort of tall poppy-ish, to one which is basically permanent first-line cocaine energy in enthusiasm. I much prefer this because I think it helps to sort of foster a sense of self-belief and self-esteem and hope and like, yeah, I'm going to take that chance. I'm going to try and do that thing. And it's why new, cool, interesting ideas come up with. And yeah, you're right. Even if most of them are wrong, I don't know. There's this idea. I think it's called the Oxford Manner, which is the ability to play gracefully with ideas, and that seems to have been very lost.
I love that.
Yeah, the ability to play gracefully with ideas. I think it's a lovely sort of way to think about a good faith discussion between two different people. And a lot of the time it gets into some sort of slanging match about like how ridiculous this person is. And,
Yes.
And sort of meanness. And I understand why. I had a really interesting conversation with Richard Reeves. He's the president and founder of the American Institute for Boys and Men. And we were talking about how when people's beliefs for something that they really, really care about are not listened to, what they typically do is become more ardent and more of a firebrand.
Yes.
And a good example of this would be people that think climate change is a real existential risk. I'm just going to put it out there now. I used to tweet this about once every 6 months. Climate change is not an existential risk priority. It simply isn't. I think it's a big deal. I think we should pay attention to it. All of those things. I think that there should be an awful lot of very, very smart people paying attention to it. And yet it is not a real existential risk priority. Permanent, unrecoverable collapse, not going to happen.
Yes.
We just had a fucking pandemic a few years ago.
Yes.
And yet we're still back. Who is talking about bioweapon facilities? Who is talking about engineered viruses?
Yeah.
Who is that concerned about the alignment problem in AI or about nanotechnology?
The NIH wants to fund gain of function again. It's fucking crazy.
So I understand why people who have a cause that they're pushing for, one that I agree in, although I don't think that the sort of velocity or magnitude is accurate. If people aren't listening, you raise your voice. You say things in a louder, more vociferous, more aggressive manner because like, no, this really, really, really matters. You know, remember Don't Look Up? It's like they start screaming at the people on the TV. Like, and I was talking to Richard Reeves about this and he was talking about how really, really interesting dynamic that I think is super important. And, you know, I would probably try and counsel Eric to take heed of this dynamic, which is when you have something that you believe in a lot and other people don't believe in it and may even be pretty sort of mean and critical and stuff about it, you have to be able to keep a smile on your face and put the idea forward in the same level of sort of charming manner, because when you become more aggressive with the way that you put things across, it just makes you sound more crazy.
100%.
It turns people off. And it's the difference between, do you want to prove your position for your own sense of recognition, or is your goal the actual position? Ben Francis, founder of Gymshark, said that a company will become successful when your goals for the company outstrip your goals for yourself.
Love that.
And it's him saying he was found as CEO, stepped down as CEO, came back in as CEO, moved across to chief product officer, came back to CEO. You know, it's because he is just in service of the thing.
Yeah.
And the problem is that naturally you care about this thing. Like it's a part of you. It feels like a sense of self. It's like very, very tightly attached to who you are. And someone's attacking that, they're attacking you, which means that you feel like you need to, hey, this is really, really important and you're not fucking listening and you need to listen, and you're, dude, you sound crazy.
Yes.
And we saw it with, I think, a great video by Charlie Houpert comparing Peterson's appearance on Kathy Newman, gotcha, like that one in 2019, and his one on Jubilee recently.
Right. Oh man, that was rough.
Yeah, and I think that the roughest part about it was nothing to do with logical consistencies or fallacies or, you know, whatever, and almost exclusively to do with demeanor.
Sure.
You know, you have somebody who's sitting back, who's laughing. I think that's silly.
Yeah.
I think that's silly. I really do. I think I think you're being silly. And you're like, fuck, like I want to listen.
Yes.
I want to listen to this person. He's regulated. It's this, as opposed to, and I understand the arc. Like, dude, if you've had to try and get off benzos and been attacked for the last half decade, it's going to be tough to regulate yourself, right? And I mean, you are literally surrounded by 25 people who all think that you're a piece of shit.
Yeah.
I get that. But just my sort of broader point here is, when someone has a belief they care about an awful lot and people don't listen, they get more aggressive, which actually pushes away the very thing that they want, which is for them to understand it. And I think it's like, it's an impossible lesson. I struggle with it all the time, but you know, it's something important. If you care about this thing, it should be a reason for you to regulate more aggressively.
Totally.
Like, you need to step in and calm yourself down even more, because if you don't care about it, like, do what you want.
Yeah.
You know? Like, you can be as
Yes.
flippant and shouty as you'd like.
Yes.
But if you really care about it, then it's like soft
Yes.
signal of effectiveness here.
I think science is supposed to be the thing that is most kind of immune from these sort of sociological factors, right? Like, you're not supposed to have any sort of bias. You're supposed to remove bias. You're like this kind of impartial observer. And if you read, like, you know, Richard Dawkins had these famous debates. He had debates with a bunch of people. I remember, you know, written correspondence between him and David Berlinski. David Berlinski was this guy who believed there are all these sort of anomalies worthy of inquiry or whatever in natural selection. And just the shrillness on, honestly, both sides, but especially on the Dawkins side, it was, you know, it is kind of off-putting. And I think if you have real confidence in your beliefs, you shouldn't have that. You should just be kind of, you know, chill and, you know, it's all good. And we shouldn't pre-crystallize knowledge. Like, if somebody came to me and was like, Jesse, actually, we have this aerial spoofing tech, and in conjunction with that, we have this like psychotronic tech, and we can get people to see a thing, and then the craft can come down, and it creates this kind of Close Encounters of the Third Kind where you see the beings and you get microchipped, but it's all this cover for MK Ultra or whatever. I'd be like, I need to hear more about that. Like, tell me the thing that explains away the data that I'm discussing. But I fully agree with you. I think not pre-crystallizing knowledge and just like first base is there a phenomena that's real that's going on? And then, but that's not interesting. The interesting thing is, what is the metaphysical version of reality? Like, I loved your question, like, how do these things fly? Like, I don't know, but let's discuss that. Like, that's the most interesting stuff. The root of the word school in its original Greek, schole, is skole. The double meaning is leisure. And leisurely there's a great book called Leisure is the Basis of Culture. Leisurely contemplation of the universe and of the world in the sort of Oxford, you know, gentlemanly tradition where if you were in 19th century Oxford, if you got straight A's, that was a bad move because you'd be stigmatized. You were supposed to effortlessly get B's in Victorian England.
No way.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, the ability to play gracefully with ideas, dude. Like,
yes.
And I think I get it. We need a external stress test to ensure that wacky or seductive but wildly incorrect theories don't gain more traction than they need, because that detracts away from the things that are actually true and accurate. But there is a balance to this, and it is if your ability to criticize is greater than your ability to create, I think that you are leaning on the wrong side.
Yes.
Like, how much are you contributing to stuff and how much are you critiquing stuff? And if you're more on the side of criticism, perhaps maybe that's the job of some scientist. I'm sure some smart person that does fucking journal review would be able to say that. Maybe, I don't know. It doesn't foster sort of a positive sum environment for me in that sort of a way. You've mentioned a couple of times you've got an issue with Elon's rocket-based model of space exploration. What's the problem with how Elon's trying to explore space, and then what would a workable version of space travel actually look like?
I find myself with Elon, you know, in between sort of Scylla and Charybdis, like two failure modes. Like, one is the failure mode of like people saying he's like totally worthless and not impressive. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, he literally, like, you know, NASA started to fail and this guy created a private version of NASA that started to work. He flew to Russia where they had liquid fuel rocket engines and single-handedly resuscitated the American space program. So I will caveat that. And then electric cars, thank you, Elon. Like, a successful car company hadn't been started, you know, for 100 years or something pre-Tesla. So very impressive dude. I wish we had more, you know, people like that. The other side is like Elon is solving all of the world's most important problems. You know, it's interstellar travel. You know, even with the electric car stuff, it's like, you know, the mining cobalt's like not the most humane thing in the world. And, you know, the batteries end up in landfills. And so like, I'm of the mind that like a lot of, you know, incremental progress is still worthy for like the ultimate thing you want to get to. Like SpaceX and Tesla are extremely worthwhile endeavors. But you have to think clearly about some of this stuff. So SpaceX, because we're talking about UFOs, again, if you wanted to get to the nearest habitable planet, that's 80,000 to 100,000 years. That just doesn't make sense, right? And you need new science. You need new theory. Like you need. He was on Joe Rogan's show, and Rogan was like, what if there's some new propulsion modality? What if it's not just Newton's 3 laws? And he was like, there can't be, or whatever. It's only mass ejection. That's the only thing. The thing ejects the mass, the fuel, and then it goes up, equal and opposite reaction. And I just think that puts a lid on what some young STEM students watching that. And it's like, again, if you were to bet against the present physical models of reality at any given time, which you should, that's the safe bet. You shouldn't put that lid on things. And then, there's the idea of the moon and Mars. The moon is ambitious enough. So Starship, which is, they're 150 to 200 ton, rocket ship that takes us, hopefully to the moon. So that thing burns 9/10 of the fuel tank just to get to low Earth orbit. Then it's floating around low Earth orbit with 1/10 of the fuel tank. You then have to get another Starship to go up, burn 9/10 of its fuel tank. It does butt-to-butt refueling with the first. That one, discards itself, deorbits or whatever. And then you end up 10 launches later, you end up with a full fuel tank of, Starship in low Earth orbit. And then it goes to the moon. And we have to get it to work. It's orbited in Leo before, but we need to get it to work at a base case. I think we just upgraded the amount of Raptor engines from 33 to 36. It's still a total work in progress. So that should implement some humility, for people thinking about this stuff. And then Mars is not super habitable. There's no oxygen, right? So you need widespread nuclear energy, some power source that's really workable there. We can barely get that stuff done here. The Earth is great, right? It's a really good biome. It's not bad. I love what you said about climate change. There's a great, this guy James Lovelock has this Gaia theory. The resilience, the Earth is extremely resilient through cataclysms and all sorts of, pandemics and stuff. So it almost devalues Earth a little bit. It's we have to remove Earth as some central point of failure. It is this very Silicon Valley level of thinking, but I think that can be overrated. It's also overrated when he thinks about AI as well, because he talks about AI as so he got really into Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence, this book in 2012.
Yeah. I love it.
It's a good book. But I think it's sort of wrong it's wrong in the way that Bostrom and Elon took its implications. So they were we're going to end up with some hard takeoff of AGI at some point. We're going to end up with, AI will gain sentience. They'll realize that in, meat space, biology is sort of super inefficient. They'll kill us all, due to the sentience. Or the paperclip problem, paperclip maximizer, alignment issues, And those are issues, don't get me wrong. But then their answer to that issue was, if you can't beat them, join them. So then you have to merge the AI with us, with, something like Neuralink, which I would actually bet on the merging of us and AI more than I'd bet on AGI. If you look at the history of computation, it is the human body and computers developing a lower latency and higher bandwidth interface over the last 70 years. You used to need a CS degree to work a mainframe computer the size of literally this room at IBM.
Natural language processing in a phone in your pocket.
And that's it. And so it's becoming more and more black box, lower latency and higher bandwidth. Would I bet that the logical conclusion of that is a chip in your brain? Yeah. That is, you just order Postmates, I want a cheeseburger or whatever, I guess, that's, that makes sense to me, right? But I think that kills humanity with a whimper and not a bang. One of my favorite quotes is Marshall McLuhan, every media extension of man is an amputation. And so we assume that the IT revolution augments, human abilities, just from spears to planes, all, physical technology, which does augment, all of that stuff really, really helps us. We're talking about nuclear energy. That would be amazing. But like the IT stuff really parasitizes us. It really like you don't need a sense of direction. You don't need a sense of recall or memory or any of this stuff anymore. Synthesizing information via ChatGPT.
External buttress. There's some interesting studies that have come out looking at students who use ChatGPT to help them write essays and their amount of recall compared with the students that didn't. Shock horror. It's like 10%.
Yes.
10 or 20% as much as if you'd done it yourself.
Totally. So the Psy-Op, in my opinion, I don't think it's an intentional Psy-Op, but it's like, if you were to create a Psy-Op, it would be like, oh, the evil AGI, like we're going to get some hard takeoff, the iRobot scenario. It's like Will Smith and the robots, they wake up and they want to just like destroy us all. I think if you really look at this stuff, it's statistics on steroids, building a nerve agent with off-the-shelf components, very scary. Alignment stuff, very scary. Autonomous warfare systems, very scary. All of that stuff's very scary. The Nick Bostrom, pie in the sky, AGI, they turn on us. I don't think so. And then the solution to that being chip in the brain, like what? Like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I've got Eliezer Yudkowsky coming on soon.
Oh, wow.
That'll be interesting. Bostrom was on last year talking about digital utopia, which was kind of his inverse of superintelligence. Superintelligence is what if it goes wrong. Digital utopia was what if it goes right.
Interesting.
But interestingly, in a sort of classic philosopher's manner, he'd managed to look at what if it goes right and what would be wrong with it. It was like a study of what's wrong with if it goes right. But yeah, I think superintelligence was seminal, and to have a book that was a New York Times bestseller and is that like difficult to get through in some ways, like dense. It's a very dense book, but fascinating. It's kind of like the Dark Souls of the popular science reading world, that it was just like, it was such a fucking tough slog, but it was obviously really impactful, and it was born out of like the Less Wrong and the Scott Alexander-y world of the Robin Hanson-y type thing.
Yes.
And, like peak rationalist movement type stuff. But it just didn't end up having that much predictive power.
Yes.
It didn't predict LLMs. It didn't predict sort of the model that was going to at least be the ascendant one now. And, come 2018, when I started the show, I was fucking fascinated, dude. I had Stuart Russell on, who wrote Human Compatible, also the guy that wrote the textbook for AI, right? It was translated into fucking a gazillion languages and used all around the world. And I, super obsessed by all of this stuff. I tried to get Toby Ord on the show like a gazillion times, and that didn't fucking work. And it kind of, that future didn't really come to pass in that way. And we, at least for now, given that pretty much all of the outcomes were atrocious, we can say that was probably a good thing.
Yes.
Right? I'm glad that he wasn't Cassandra, because it would have been a real problem if he was.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't think it had the predictive power maybe that we might have thought. And it just goes to show that even the people who are balls deep in the research of these things often can't see. And that was only 10 years.
Yeah.
11 years ago.
Totally.
And it's been... LLMs kind of had been around for a little while. I think it was like 2010 when that's...
Deep learning was like around that time, and then Transformers were 2018. Right. So it was like,
okay. I don't know. It's just, it's an interesting one to see what are the other unknown unknowns that are going to sort of come about, even in fields where there's super smart people that are really thinking deeply about this and have got armies of high IQ autists in internet forums, like really fucking contributing to this, and they're scraping it and thinking about it, and they've got all of these people in a council. I don't know, man. And I think that that's where having the Oxford Manor and Renegade theories and allowing those to at least have a seat at the table every so often is useful, because it's evident that by iteration, stuff doesn't always get predicted correctly. And it's like orthogonal moves.
Always.
Like up instead of left or right.
Yes. It's always the sort of adjacent surprise. The only guarantee about the future is that it will surprise you. And the armchair pundit is always wrong. So I think all of these things need to be super loosely held. And I love the way you should comport yourself is what you said, with real, epistemic humility and collegiality with anybody talking about this stuff, because it's ultimately a lot of this stuff too is like it's like a theological debate. Like you could kind of guess based on somebody's like big five personality traits or like the way they think about things generally, like where they're going to shake out on especially issues like AI or UFOs, where like these are issues where, you know, I like to think the more you know, the more you know. And I do feel like I probably know more than the average person, but it's almost the more you know, the less you know in some sense too. It's like, they're extremely, they touch on really deep truths about reality where we're groping in the dark and we just don't ultimately know. And so I think that everybody should sort of comport themselves accordingly.
What ways might you be wrong when it comes to the UFO stuff?
I'm probably very wrong about a lot of it, but I try to, again, always like say I'm thinking probabilistically. So the idea that like phenomenologically there is something worthy of inquiry where you have really credible people seeing stuff, we're getting like cross-sensor data, you know, on that stuff. Is the data that we're getting, you know, off of FLIR, for example, like the same thing people are seeing? In the case of Nimitz, it seemed like it because you had eyewitnesses present, and then one of them, you know, was, Chad Underwood was like literally managing, you know, the FLIR sensor or whatever, and he's in the same craft as David Fravor, so he's in the same F-16. So, you know, but I think you have to think in probabilities all the way down. So it's like that until like, you know, in Area 51 we have a saucer that you can unveil. Like, I can't say that in good faith that for sure we have some sort of saucer that we can unveil, especially knowing that I think in the past, you know, Ben Rich, who was the, you know, president of Skunkworks in the 80s, used to call UFOs unfunded opportunities. And I think explicitly they used UFOs as tech protection for other sort of, you know, like the SR-71 Blackbird was like, that's a real stealth craft that's been unveiled now. The U-2 spy plane, all of these things were mistaken as UFOs back in the day. So I think a lot of this stuff is prosaically explainable.
What do you reckon? Where do you put the probability of it being extraterrestrial versus secret tech that's human run for the phenomena that have been spotted?
Well, this is what I love about, you know, the show I run. It's like UFOs and all the titles. As you know, YouTube doesn't do well with nuance. So, but like the way I really view what I'm doing is like I am flanking the truth. So like if I can be at the forefront of the anti-gravity stuff, because Elon said, it was really interesting. He always says there's nothing to see here. He jokes about the UFO thing. And then I think it was with Tucker. He was like, we have all these like pretty like impressive pilots coming out saying they've seen things. And then he goes, it was really interesting. He goes, actually, I think it's just American black military ops. You know, it's like these special access programs. That is a huge statement from Elon because he's basically, unless he's saying that we have some sort of weird visual spoofing technology, which I don't think he was saying that, then he's saying that we have some sort of like anomalous propulsion modality that SpaceX isn't using. So he kind of painted himself into a corner there. So that's what I view. That I mean, I truly think the show is like at the forefront of like the gravity stuff with Townsend Brown, with what happened at the Chapel Hill conference in 1957 and the creation of quantum gravity and all of that stuff. And then also this like weird anomalous stuff that people are seeing in the sky. And then the third kind of to make the iron triangle thing that I would say is consciousness, where it's the thing people can say the least about, but it's probably the most fundamental to everything when it comes to physics. And I think there are, you know, anomalies and interesting things when it comes to consciousness that modern science can't account for. And I think if you can stay at the front of the conversation in those three things, you can sort of V formation or flank your way to the truth, triangulate the truth, if you will. But I try to be super epistemically humble about the Brown stuff and the gravity. It's like, I'm not sure. It's a really interesting fact pattern that I interviewed, deputy CTO of a spin out from Northrop Grumman, who they built the B-2 stealth bomber. And I said, in a room full of, this was like a Founders Fund conference, a ton of entrepreneurs and VCs. I was like, of any of this stuff, what is actionable? Because we were talking about UFOs in this sort of metaphysical sense. And he goes, watch Jesse's video on Thomas Townsend Brown. So to me, it's like, and I've had a lot of these experiences where I'm like, is anybody watching this interview that I'm doing? And like this guy's credentials, like he was a VP at he helped set up Army Futures Command and like ran a lot of the Army's most, tech modernization efforts. So he's like a very real guy when it comes to this stuff. So I feel like you can kind of flank the truth, if you will, and think about everything sort of probabilistically, but in aggregate, you come to this high probability that we might be on the verge of a paradigm shift, especially with conventional physics sort of eating itself alive, as we just discussed.
Yeah, that is interesting. Why is consciousness the third leg of this stool?
Yeah. Well, I think consciousness is, it's always the problem of, Dave Chalmers would say it's like the hard problem of consciousness. It's like, you can't tell me I'm not a pea zombie or whatever. Like, I could be like some computer algorithm. Like, I interviewed the Google whistleblower for Lambda around the AI stuff, and he was like convinced that Lambda was conscious. And I was like, I think it's just math on steroids. I think it's statistics on steroids. He was like, no, it's conscious. But it turns into this theological debate where like there is no way to ultimately say whether something is conscious or not. But it's the most interesting thing about physics itself. Is it comporting itself to, or do we have an interface? And math and physics and all of the observable universe is sort of moving through this computational interface, or do you live in this perfectly Cartesian dualist universe where you are this measurement sensor, and then you have, the world around you as this kind of hard-coded, kind of fully fundamentally real thing. So like, this is a table, and like, this is me, and like, there's like no relationship outside of, like I'm just a measurement sensor of this like objective world. And there's no one on the conventional Citadel physics side who can say for sure that this debate has been, fully put to rest. There's no way to put it to rest. And if you look at a lot of the early quantum field theorists, guys like, von Neumann, who was known as the smartest guy at his time, he invented the mathematical underpinnings of quantum mechanics, but was a total polymath, a lot of modern computational principles. He and his, colleague, Jonathan Wigner, had a model of wave function collapse that involved the mind being part of wave function collapse. And just for the audience, for context, a wave function, which is governed, basically Schrodinger, is this mid-century scientist who basically came up with this equation that involves a wave function probability for where a subatomic particle might show up in some sort of eigenstate. And it's the square of the amplitude will define what eigenstate it collapses into. So all subatomic particles kind of exist probabilistically. They don't exist in these sort of discrete, forms particles until you observe them. And so it's this sort of, particle wave duality or whatever. And so Wigner and von Neumann were like, actually, the mind might have to do with wave function collapse at a certain point in their careers. Pauli flirted with this. Heisenberg, who is, again, in charge of a lot of or responsible for a lot of quantum mechanics and ran the entire, Nazi, nuke program, flirted with this. He has a great book called Life in Physics, where he sort of talks about these kind of more metaphysical discussions around how the mind might, be involved in this. Schrodinger himself was sort of against this. But if you look at, like, he had this lecture series called What is Life in 1944, and it was all around, consciousness's disproportionate impact on biology and how consciousness is sort of fundamental. He had a dog that he called Atman, based on the he had Atman and Brahman and, kind of Hindu mythology. He was extremely interested in the Upanishads. And so a lot of these early quantum field theorists or quantum mechanics theorists would flirt with the idea that the mind collapsed the wave function. And now, if you were to talk to a modern physicist, they would say, no, it's a quantum, in the double slit experiment, for example, it's the quantum detector. That's just the quantum detector. It doesn't matter whether an observer is present. They have no way to prove that. Like, the quantum detector might be holding a superposition of, measurements itself that the observer is then, measuring. There's literally no way to prove it. And while physics has went into this like cul-de-sac, a la string theory and a lot of the discussions we're having, you have these really interesting fields of study that have popped up at pretty much every elite university in the US, or a lot of them. At Duke, they had the Rhine Institute, Stanford Research Institute, UCLA, Princeton Engineering and Anomalous Research Lab. All of these guys, in one form or another, studied what's known as parapsychology, which is, in its most rudimentary form, that the mind affects wave function collapse. None of the scientists that engaged in these sorts of experiments came out thinking that the mind didn't affect it and there wasn't some sort of interface. It's really interesting. Like, the guy who ran the Princeton Engineering and Anomalous Research Lab is in charge of, he's responsible for some modern plasma propulsion that are still used in satellites today. He was dean of the Princeton Engineering School. His name is Bob John, and he wrote a whole book called I think it was Marginal Realities or something, and it was about how, like, there's some mental interface with the wave function, and he came up with a whole model, a physicalist model around how this might occur. In conventional physics, it's pretty much Roger Penrose is like sitting out on he's like the only guy like completely, out on a limb saying that there's this thing called orchestrated objective reduction. Maybe the microtubules collapse the wave function, but you have all these elite universities mid-century that said we got weak but very real and statistically significant effects around the mind, affecting the wave function in this experiment known as random event generators, where you have a super rudimentary computer. So it's a computer that produces ones and zeros. You tie it to something that's conventionally thought of as random in quantum mechanics, so something like radioactive isotope decay, or a double slit experiment where you expect the same, 50-50 distribution of, both slits or whatever. And you have an observer come in, walk into the room, and you're seeing ones and zeros being produced on a graphical interface that's tied to this provably random thing. So it's literally the perfect digital coin flip, right? You'd expect over a long enough time scale with some expected standard deviation, the same amount of ones and zeros. All of these people got a statistically significant standard deviation with this experiment. And this is where it gets really crazy. The CIA had this sort of remote viewing, program from, again, the 70s to the 90s, where they were using remote viewing as a really important intelligence modality. In fact, the top remote viewer is a guy named Joseph McMoneagle, and he won what's known as the Legion of Merit for over 200 instances in which he helped aid American intel with his insights that were drawn up psychically. Jimmy Carter, at the end of his presidency, said the craziest thing he'd ever experienced in his presidency. He's on record saying this. You can hear the audio. He says a woman named Rosemary Smith, they were looking for a Tu-22 Russian spy plane, or cargo plane rather, that had fallen below the treetops somewhere in Africa. And this woman circled a 3 square mile radius in Zaire, and they found the plane. So this was studied at the highest levels of the government. The CIA then contracted a woman who's still alive today, Jessica Utz, to do a meta-statistical analysis, Huberman-style meta-study, on this sort of stuff. She went on to become the president of the American Statistical Association in 2016. So you can go argue with the American Statistical Association president. I'm not going to. And she came out being like, if this methodology and this level of skepticism and scrutiny were applied to any other field of science, it would be accepted immediately. Like, the other field would be accepted immediately. Because of the stigma, this field is not accepted.
Why is there so much stigma?
I think it's manufactured. I don't know. I don't know. I truly wish people sort of looked at this more. Now it's starting to the dam is starting to break, like, thanks to, it's like Rogan and Sean Ryan and all these guys. It's like there's all these like government whistleblowers coming out being like, the government's actually way weirder than you think, and we experience all these like trippy things inside of it. So I do think the dam is breaking somewhat, but I don't know why, why people aren't more open-minded.
Is this related to the telepathy tapes? Have you seen those?
Yes, it's perfectly related to the telepathy tapes. It's yes. So the telepathy tapes is a podcast that surpassed all podcasts, Modern Wisdom, Joe Rogan, everything. It was for a little bit. It was like for a month or something. It was the #1 podcast in America. And it was all these autistic, nonverbal children across the United States saying, basically repeatedly showing, and I should caveat this was not done in double-blind settings, so this needs to be done. Simultaneous to that, I think anybody that listens to all the tapes, and you're reasonably open-minded, will say there's obviously something going on that's interesting here, where they'll have, the mother in another room generating, an image on an iPad, and then the son or daughter, the autistic nonverbal kid in another room, totally isolated, they'll see some image pop up and like not even statistically significant. Like 19 out of 20 times they'll know what the image the mother or father are seeing. And often it's they call it remote perception because it's actually the mind meld that's more fundamental than them just being able to see something in objective time space. It's their ability to kind of meld with their parents, which kind of makes sense. Like you interviewed Rupert Sheldrake, I remember a few years ago. A lot of that kind of lines up with that sort of anecdotal, it's not anecdotal, I mean, experimental findings. He doesn't have amazing theories. I would say the morphic resonance stuff it's a sort of a placeholder theory, but he's not a bad empiricist. Like the experimental protocols aren't bad. So these kids they'll meet up on this telepathic hill and they'll talk to each other and they'll exchange information. It's this fascinating thing. And I do think there are more high agency people interested in this stuff and who have studied it rigorously than meet the eye. Like, I'll give you an example. My closest mentor runs a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund, and he's impressive in that context, like a high performer in that context. He is good at computer science. He probably has like a 200 IQ or something, like really, really smart dude. He helped Bob John, the guy I mentioned, the Princeton engineering and anomalous research guy. He helped him run the lab for 10 years. And he is the highest integrity guy I know. He is fully high conviction on these random event generator experiments. And he would say, he would bring the physicists from, Princeton into the lab and they'd say, look, like this is really important. This is like breaking your models. And they would say stuff like, oh, no, it's like a file drawer issue or survivorship bias, like all the kind of heuristics that you would use to like break a scientific experiment. And he would go through each thing line by line, like, no, it's not file drawer. We accounted for that with this. No, it's not survivorship bias. We accounted for it with this. No, it's really cohort wide and we controlled for all these other things. Like extremely extreme. If you met this guy, you'd be very impressed by him. And he's like, they just wouldn't listen. They just it was it literally, and you look at these things. I mean, the idea that the universe might be computational in nature and we might be rendering it, that we might be sort of rendering a substrate that is computational, like in for when you see an interface, like on your computer, you see icons, right? You don't see the underlying thing. Like you need like a code compiler to like abstract, to take like the ones and zeros and turn it into like this larger abstracted out thing. And you don't see like electromagnetic waves, right? Like you see like you have to iconize it, like red, is this like, oh, I'm scared red, like it's evolutionarily adaptive to sort of do that. There are all these physicists that talk about like the participatory universe. So they would go right up until the kind of parapsychological line of like the mind would collapse wave function. But I think they got spooked or they would flirt with it privately and they wouldn't sort of get into it. So John Wheeler had this sort of, this participatory universe. He talked about it from bit and computational universe. And he would say that basically like wave function collapse is basically just a bunch of yes/no questions. So it's, it's kind of like binary code, if you will. And, but he would never go, he would never get into like the mind is actually the thing collapsing the wave function. But then you have all this interesting data coming out that maybe the mind does collapse the wave function. And you have things like, okay, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, where if you measure position of a subatomic particle, momentum gets fuzzier. That looks like a computational caching function to me. So that looks like you're only storing one of those in local memory. And, what's
the implication of that?
The implication of that is that you are, there's some deeper substrate that is kind of computational of the universe, and you are a local node, and you are rendering your reality live. And, I don't know what it is exactly that you're, is it intention? I know that's like a really woo-woo term. Like you can go to like a new agey conference and they'll talk about the secret and manifestation and all that stuff. I think a lot of people in their lives probably say, like, if I were to say, Chris, do you have anything that's happened in your life that's like been well below chance, that's felt like this just impossible synchronicity? You'd probably say yes, I assume. Like most people, if you were to poll, they would sort of say that. And then they would sort of quickly walk it back and be like, but like it's sort of impossible, given physics. But there are all these things, even, the way that, golden ratio and Fibonacci sequences, like, used in a lot of geometric structures all over, Earth or whatever. Or, Planck's constant, if it were slightly off, like, we wouldn't have a habitable environment, like the anthropic principle. That points, I think, towards probably something that, is more computational, in nature. The Sheldrake stuff with morphic resonance. Again, I don't know about the theories behind it, but just the empirical observations that if you build a crystal structure and then you build that crystal structure again, it's easier the second and third time to build the same crystal structure if you have a novel structure. To me, it's because uploading times are slower than downloading times. You have, in sports, the Bannister effect. Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile in 1952. It was broken 10 times in the next 2.5 years. It's as if doing something new and novel takes longer to upload to some monad, some central repository of data or whatever. You are client side, that's server side, and the new incremental person that does this does it that much quicker and easier. It's like, Sheldrake shows this with crossword puzzles. You do it a little bit quicker if 1,000 people have done it before you. So, like, I think we'll end up with some model of the universe that might be computational in nature. Nobody can disprove that. I can't prove that definitively, but no scientist can ultimately disprove that. And all I'm saying here is that way more serious physicists and thinkers have sort of flirted with this idea than I think people realize. And then meanwhile, you have, Sabina Hassenfeld or Eric Weinstein and Sean Carroll, like, in this crazy argument about nothing. Like,
Jesse, you're awesome, dude. Fuck, this is like a tour de force of stuff. And I love your pod. I love your channel. I think it's sick. Tell people where they should go to check it all out.
They should go to Jesse Michels on YouTube, Jesse Michels on Spotify, Jesse Michels Official on Instagram. And I love your channel too, man. I've been really inspired by Modern Wisdom, and I've watched you for, I don't know, 3-4 years, and it's been so cool to see you just blow up. So thank you for having me, man.
And for you. Let's run this back soon, dude. I appreciate you.
Let's do it, man. Cool.
Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that episode, you will love this one with Mr. Naval Ravikant. It's first episode in 6 years. Go on. Press it.